Now, before we start learning how to build charts in Tableau, we have to understand some basics, like for example, how to add multiple measures in one single view. I saw many new Tableau developers that they get confused on how to add a second measure to the visualization, because in Tableau we have different places and different methods on how to add multiple measures in one single view. And here in Tableau we have three methods. The first one is to use individual axes for each measure. The second method is to use one single shared axis using measure values and measure names. And the third one is to use dual axes in Tableau. So now we're gonna go and learn those methods step by step, and we're gonna learn as well the advantages and disadvantages of each method. So let's go. Alright guys, now we're gonna start with the first method. We have the individual axes for each measure. So let's see how we can create it and how it's gonna look like. Let's go for example to our big data source. Let's pick the order date to the columns, and now in order to create individual axes for each measure, we're gonna drag and drop the measures in the rows or in the columns. So for example, we're gonna take the sales and put it in the rows, and let's take as well the profits and drag and drop it to the rows as well. And now we can see in our view that each measure has its own axis, so that's why we call it individual axis for each measure. So we can see for the sales we have this axis that starts from 0 to 1 million, and for the profit it starts from 0 to 100k. And those two axes for those two measures are completely separated from each other's. There is no overlapping or anything. And now of course we have two measures. We can go and add a third, fourth, and so on. So there is no limitations on how many measures we can add to our visualizations. So you can see now we have 4 measures, and you can see each of those measures has different axes with different ranges. And now I would like to understand something very important in Tableau, is that once you are adding multiple measures to the views, you will get multiple pages on the marks. The marks in Tableau is the place where you're gonna go and customize the visualizations, to customize the charts that we have over here in our view. And since we have multiple measures, we will get multiple pages in the marks. So let's check what do we have over here. So we have the first one is all. Then we have an individual mark for each measure that we have inside our view. So now let's understand how this works. Let's start with the first one, the all. Now in this page, anything that you change in the setup, it's going to be reflected for all measures, for all charts. For example, instead of having the line, I would like to have the bar. But now if I change it to bar, as you can see, all the measures can be changed to bar charts. Or if you go over here, for example, to the colors and change it to black, you can see that all our measures now are black, and so on. If you go to the size, reduce the size, you can see the size of all our measures is going to be reduced. So anything that I'm changing in the all, it's going to be reflected for all measures in the view. But now since we have individual axes for each measures, we can go and customize each of those charts individually. So for example, let's say that I would like to change only the sales. I can go to the marks of sales over here. So let's switch to the page of sum of sales, and then instead of having bar, I would like to have it as a line. So now we can see we have changed the chart type only for the sales. Everything else can stay as a bar chart. And the same thing for the profit. You can go over here to the profits and say, okay, instead of black, I would like to have it, for example, as blue. So as you can see, this customization is going to be done only for this measure, only for the profits. And then the same thing for the other measures. If you say, okay, for the quantity, I would like to change the chart type instead of bar. Let's go for something like area. So let's switch to the quantity, and then let's go to the area over here. So with that, we have changed only the chart type for the quantity. So you can see those marks are really helpful in order to customize our charts, and you can go and do that individually for each measure, or you can go to all measures over here and then do the changes for all measures together. So that's all for the marks. They are really important in order to customize the charts inside our visualizations. One more thing that's important to understand is that we have here 4 tabs inside the marks because we have 4 measures. Well, because we have continuous measures. So for example, for the years, we don't have here any tab in order to customize the years because it is discrete. For example, let's go and switch the sum of sales from continuous measures to discrete. So right click on it and go to discrete. So with that, you can see that the sum of sales did disappear from the mark. So that means we cannot customize it anymore because it is discrete. So let's go and change it again back to continuous. And with that, we're gonna get it again in the marks. So you can customize only continuous fields. Alright guys, so now as you can see for this method, we can go and customize our charts individually and as we want. And another advantage is that we can go and add as many measures as we want inside our visualizations. But the disadvantage here is that we have separated axes, which is in some situations, it's really hard to compare the measures together if they are like splitted like this. That's why we have in Tableau different methods in order to combine and to merge the axes and the charts together. So that's all for the first method, where we're gonna have individual axes for each measure. Alright guys, moving on to another method in order to combine multiple measures in one view, and that is by sharing the same axis. We can do that using the measure names and measure values. If you check the data pane in each data source in Tableau, you will find always two fields. We will have always measure names and measure values. Those two fields, the measure names and values, they are automatically generated from Tableau. They don't come from the original source of your data. So what are those fields? The measure names is a discrete dimension that contains the names of all measures that you have inside your data source. And in the other hand, we have the measure values. It is continuous measure that contains the values of all measures that you have inside your data source. And in Tableau, there are two ways in order to use the measure names and values. The first one is by simply just drag and drop from the data pane to the view. So let's take, for example, the measure names to the rows, and as you can see, currently no measure values are selected because we don't have anything in the view. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go to the measure values and let's drag and drop it to the text over here, and now you can see in the view all our measures that we have inside our data source. So the count of customers, count of orders, discounts, profit, sales, and so on. So those are all available measures that Tableau can find inside your data source. So here again, the measure name gonna be the name of the measure. So the count of customers, count of orders, those informations comes from the measure names, and the values of those measures gonna come from the measure values. So as you can see, it's very simple. The names of the measures, the count of customers, discount, and profit, those names comes from the measure names, and the values that we have inside this view comes from the measure values. So here you can control stuff. For example, you can go and remove any measure that you don't want to see inside our view. So for example, let's go and remove the sum of unit price. So just drag and drop it somewhere outside, and as you can see, Tableau created immediately a filter. So if you go over here on the filters and edit it, you will see a list of all measures that we have inside our data source. And as well, if you want to remove some measures, you can go and deactivate or deselect the measures that you don't want to see inside our view. Let's go and hit OK, and with that we have reduced the number of measures inside the view to 4. And one more thing that we can do over here, that we can go and change the sort of the measures inside our view. So for example, let's take the count of customers from the top and put it in the bottom. As you can see, we just changed the order of the measures inside the view. Alright, so this is one way in order to use the measure names and measure values inside the visualizations, by just drag and drop them inside the view. But there is like another quick way in order to use those informations. Let me show you what I mean. I'm just gonna go and remove everything from our view and then start from scratch. Let's take the order date to the columns, and let's take, for example, the sales to the rows. So far we have only one measure in our view, everything as normal. But now let's say that I would like to add another measure to the view. Before we learn that, we take the profit and put it near the sales. But with that, we have learned that Tableau gonna go and create two individual axes. We don't want that, so let me just remove it. I would like to have one axis for both of the measures. So in order to do that, we can use the measure values and names. And in order to quickly generate that, let's take the profit, and now very slowly let's just drag it to the axis of the sales. And as you can see, now Tableau gonna show us two green vertical lines. So with that, we are telling Tableau that I would like to share the same axis for two different measures. So let's just drop it on the axis, and here Tableau gonna go and convert everything. So we don't have anymore here the sum of sales, we have now the measure values, and in the filters we have the measure names. Inside it we will get only two measures and the sales. So as you can see, Tableau can prepare everything for us, and this is a quick way in order to use multiple measures using the measure values and measure names. And we can see as well here in the measure values that we have only those two measures. So now let's check the visual. As you can see, we have only one axis for two measures. So the green one gonna be the sales and the gray one gonna be the profits. So that means those two measures are sharing the same axis. And of course, we can go and add more measures to our view, not only two. We can take, for example, the discounts. We can go and drop it inside the measure values to the last one, for example. And with that, we got 3 lines. 3 measures are sharing the same axis. So it's really nice and compact way in order to compare multiple measures using the same axis. But of course here you have to pay attention to the scale of the axis. For example, the scale of the sales, as you can see, the green one is really huge, from 0 to 1 million. Now if you check the discount, as you can see, everything like almost 0 because the scale compared to the sales is very small. That's why for this method it makes sense to use multiple measures in the same axis if they have a similar scale of data. But if there is like big difference in the scales, the visual will not make sense in order to compare two measures. So in this example, it doesn't really make sense to use the discount inside these visualizations because we cannot really compare it. It has really small scale. One more disadvantage of this method is that if you check the marks over here, you can see that we have only one tab for everything. We don't have individual marks for each measure, and that means we cannot go and customize each measure as we want, like we saw before in the method 1, where we want to use in one case, for example, the line diagram, and another measure we can use the bar diagram and so on. So we cannot go and customize individually each measure, but instead all those measures are sharing the same setup for the visualizations. So that means let's go, for example, and go and change the size. If we do that, it's going to affect all measures inside the view, and I cannot change it individually. So everything that you are making here or changing in the visual, it's going to affect all the measures. For example, let's go and change it to bar diagram and so on. The only thing that you can go and customize is the colors. So if you go to the colors over here and edit colors, you can assign for each measure a different value, but that's all. So we cannot go and customize the charts as we want. So if you use measure values and measure names, pay attention, you don't have the freedom of changing the visuals of your charts. But it's still very useful in many cases where you want to have multiple measures sharing the same single axis. Alright, so with that I hope it's more clear now why do we have in Tableau measure values and measure names. Alright everyone, so now moving on to the last method. In order to combine multiple measures in one view, we can use the dual axis. Dual axes are a really great way and very useful in many scenarios where you can go and compare two measures together. So let's see how this works in Tableau, and there are two ways on how to create dual axis in Tableau. The first one I'm going to show you now is that let's take, for example, the order date to the columns, and then let's take the sales informations to the rows. And now I would like to get another measure inside our view. So let's take the profit and just put it in the rows side by side near the sales. So here we are back to the method 1, where we have two measures separated with two individual axes. So now as you can see, those two measures are separated from each other's. I would like to bring those two visuals on top of each other's. So how to do it? Let's go back to our measure. So as you can see, we have two measures, the sales and the profits. We're gonna go to the profit, to the one on the right side, right click on it, and here we have the option of dual axis. So let's go and click on that. So now as you can see, those two charts now are on top of each other's using dual axis. The axis for the sales and the axis of the profits side by side. And we can see as well the shape of those measures that change. So now instead of having two green pills, we have now one green pill from two measures, the sales and the profits. And now if you check the scales of those dual axes, you can see that the sales as usual from 0 to 1 million and the profits from 0 to 100k. So now here you have two options. Either you can leave it as it is with two different scales, or you can go and make them similar to each other's. And this is what we do in most situations. We go and synchronize those two axes. So in order to do that, let's go to the profit over here on this axis, right click on it, and here we have the option of synchronize axis. So let's go and select that. As you can see now, the profit scale has exactly the same scale as the sales. It starts from 0 to 1 million, and the marked or the visual did adjust as well to the new scale. So as you can see now, we have it on the bottom, before we had it near the sales. And now you might ask, you know what, why do we use dual axis? I can just go and use the measure values like the method 2, and I can add as many measures as I want to the view. So why do we have dual axis? Well, there is two reasons for that. First, here you have the option to decide whether you want to synchronize the axis or not. So if you go to the method 1 with the measure values, you can see that everything is synchronized and you have only one axis, and we cannot change that. But if we go back to the dual axis, we have always the option to synchronize the axis or not. So this is one benefit. The major benefit of dual axis is that I can go now and customize each measure as I want. So if you check the marks, we have here again a tab for each measure. So again, they're all gonna customize both of the measures. But if we go to the sum of sales, we can go and decide the visual setup of this measure. So for example, I can go over here and change the size, or I can go to the sum of profits and say instead of the line diagram, I would like to get a bar diagram. So here is exactly the advantage of the dual axis, where we can go and customize the chart or the measures individually but still using the same axis. And you don't have this option if you are using the measure values, because you have to make a decision or a setup for all measures. But the disadvantage here is that it is dual axis, so only 2 measures. But it's still a great way in order to compare 2 measures in Tableau. I would like to show you now the second method on how to create quickly dual axis in Tableau. So let's go and remove those stuff, and then let's take again the sales. And now for the second measure, instead of dragging and dropping it here near the sales and then switch it to dual, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go to the visual over here, and if you move it to the right side, you can see that we have one vertical line. And here, be careful, if you move it to the axis, you have 2 vertical lines where you're gonna have the measure values and measure names. We don't want that, we want the dual axis. So just move it to the right side, the opposite side of the axis, and you can see we have one vertical green line. If you drop it, Tableau gonna go and create immediately a dual axis between those 2 measures. So this is how you can create dual axis in Tableau quickly. And one last point about the dual axis is to understand the order of the measures has an effect on the visual. So let me show you what I mean. I'm gonna go now to the profit and change it from bar diagram to line diagram. And as you can see, the red line from the profit is like in front of the sales. So that means the measure sales is in the back and the profit is in the front. If you want to switch that in the visual, what you're gonna do, you're just gonna switch the order of the dual axis. So if we take the sales from left and just put it on the right, and as you can see now, the bar diagram in the front and the line diagram in the background, which in this situation, it's not really cool to have the line behind the bars. So now let's go and switch it again. So the profit on the right side. So with that, we're gonna get it in the front and the sales in the back. All right, so that's all for the dual axis. And now, of course, in Tableau, you can go and mix all those methods together in single view. So here we have a dual axis in this example. I can go now and add the measure values instead of the profit. So instead of having the profit, we can have the measure values, the method 2. So in order to do that, let's take, for example, the quantity, and let's drag and drop it on the axis of the profit. So let's drop it over here, and as you can see, Tableau immediately switch the sum of profit to measure values. But still on the left side we have sales. So now we are doing a dual axis between the sales and a bunch of measures. So now we can go and add more measures to the measure values. So let's take the unit price and add it over here. We can add a discount, but now let's just change the colors in order to make it more clear. So now I am at the tab of the measure values. Click on the colors, edit colors, and now the quantity, I'm gonna give it green. Yeah, unit price, let's give it gray, discounts, this color, and that's all. So with that, as you can see, we have different lines, but all of them are lines. We cannot change that because it is a measure value. So all of them are sharing the same setup. And on the background, we have the sum of sales from the dual axis. So that means you can go and combine those stuff. And of course, we can go and add the method 1. So let's take the count of the orders and just drag and drop it to the rows over here. So with that, you can see that Tableau did go and create an individual axis for the count of orders. So that means if we look now to our measures in this view, the first one, the sum of sales, we are using the dual axis, this bar diagram, the blue one. And then on the right side of the dual axis, we have bunch or bundle of measures. So here we have the sum of profit, quantity, unit price, and discount. So we have a group of measures as a part of the dual axis using the measure values. Count of order, it is completely separated and not sharing the axis with the others. So we have it as an individual axis using the method 1. Alright, so as you can see, you can mix stuff, and this is exactly the power of Tableau, where we have high customizations on how to visual our data. Alright everyone, so now let's have a quick summarize. In order to combine multiple measures in single view, in single visualizations in Tableau, we have 3 methods. The first one is to use individual axes. That means we're gonna have for each measure a different separated independent axis. And the main advantage of this method is that we can go for each measure and decide about the visuals, which visual type we're gonna use, the colors, the sizing, and so on. So the customizing of the measures is gonna be independently. And the second benefit is that we can go and add as many measures as we want inside one view. But the weak point in this method is that it's really hard to compare those measures together. That's why we have the second method where we can go and compare all those measures together using one shared or single axis. And we can create such a visualizations using the measure names and the measure values. So we have only one axis and we can have multiple measures sharing the same axis. Well, the main benefit over here is that we can add as many measures as we want, and as well we can compare those measures better than the method 1 since they share the same axis. But the disadvantage in this method is that we cannot go and customize each of those measures independently. So that means all those measures gonna share the same configurations of the visualization. So we cannot use here a line, then a bar, then change something else. We have always to use the same visualizations for all measures. And that's why we have the third method in Tableau to use the dual axis. So the main benefit of the dual axis is that we can compare two measures closely to each other's. We can define whether we're gonna synchronize the axis or not. And here the advantage compared to the previous one, the single axis, is that we can customize the visuals for each measures independently. So here we have a line diagram together with a bar diagram. Only disadvantage of this method is that we can compare only two measures. Alright guys, so that was the different methods on how to add multiple measures in one single view and when to use them. Next we're gonna start building basic charts, and first we're gonna have the bar charts. And if you like my content and you want to support the channel, then I really appreciate it if you support, like and comment. This really gonna help the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.